love the Bologna Book Fair. When I first went, I was so overwhelmed. I didn't know anything going in, and I was just so amazed and in awe at the sheer quantity of art around me. It just seemed that every wall had some sort of exhibition on it with amazing experimental art. It was at the Bologna Book Fair where I discovered one of my new favorite artists that I'm just completely obsessed with. His name is, I'm pretty sure, Stepan Zafrel. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it because it's a Czech name. He's from Czechoslovakia, and he immigrated to Italy, studied art, opened an art school, published amazing work, and anyways, I'm completely obsessed with his stuff. One of the highlights of attending the Bologna Book Fair for me is actually something that has nothing to do with the book fair at all, which is just the amazing streets of Bologna, Italy, and just how friendly they are to artists that want to draw from observation. So you can basically just draw anywhere around the city and find amazing architecture, people out eating and walking and socializing. It's really like Disneyland for artists. Like, if you are into observational drawing, I highly recommend visiting one of these amazing walkable cities like Bologna, Italy. And the food is amazing. While I'm not at the book fair this year, I'm in another country and I'm taking care of a little baby. I still wanted to kind of pay homage to how much I just love the Bologna Book Fair every year, and this little painting is sort of that for me. Something I love about the city that I'm really trying to capture in this painting is the warmth of the buildings. Everything in Bologna kind of has this orangey glow to it, and it's so beautiful. I wanted to capture it in this painting. I also wanted to make sure that while I was working on this, I wasn't getting too perfect about my lines. I wanted to keep them wonky and kind of wiggly, if that makes sense, because I think that just gives the buildings a lot more life. Just keeping my lines fresh and not overworking my shapes too much, and putting paint over the top of my first drawing rather than polishing it up and then putting paint over it is something that's kind of new to me. And I'm really loving the look of it in my own art. What initially drew me to my reference photo I'm using for this painting was the contrast between little tiny details and big shapes. I love the contrast between the big buildings and the huge blocks of orange and sort of like the spiderwebby, noodly lines of the wires and just the poles and street signs, and even the cars. I loved how the cars looked too. It was just this juxtaposition of new versus old, and I really wanted to capture that here. as I'm painting, I'm keeping in mind atmosphere and I'm trying to convey depth using color. So the further back a building is, the more white and blue I'll mix into the color. Even if the building is like the local color is objectively warmer than the building in front of it, I'll still put a little bit more blue and a little bit more white into it to just push it back and give the viewer that illusion of depth. It would have been really easy for me looking at all of these things in my reference photo to get overwhelmed and to try and bite off more than I can chew with the details, and especially with my mediums, because I love attempting mixed media and I often get overwhelmed when doing it. So something I made sure to do while working on this painting was to limit my materials to just acrylic gouache and colored pencils. That is all I used for this entire painting. And I'm so glad I did, because this is actually my second attempt painting the streets of Bologna in the studio. The first time it really did not go over well because I was just trying to capture everything. I didn't have a very specific vision of what I wanted to convey, and then I was just making every material under the sun available to me, and it was just not a good sight. The further along I get in art, the more I realize that art is less about what you put on the page and more about what you leave off the page. So it's more about simplifying the world around you rather than depicting as much as you can of the world around you. And that is really, to me, what makes a successful painting. As I mentioned before, what drew me to this scene was the contrast between big and small, simple and complex, and old and new. So I hope that when the viewer sees this finished painting that they can kind of pick up on that. An easy little trick for when you're painting landscapes, including buildings or just, nature, is to remember your light and shadows and the temperature of each one. So if you've got a cool light source, like I have in this painting, I'm gonna try and make those shadows warm. So warm shadows, cool light in this example. But mostly what I do is the opposite, which is warm light, cool shadows. Because it's Bologna and because these little passageways next to the street are so warm and red, I just decided this is going to be a warm shadow piece and the light is going to be very cool. And you can kind of tell that looking at the reference photo, because there's this really, really stark white light shining on the buildings to the right. And I go in digitally afterwards and sort of cool those buildings down a bit. And I think that matches better with what the reference photo was conveying. Another easy way to communicate depth in your paintings that I'm trying to do here is these window shutters. I would count these as details, small details of the building. And as the buildings travel back in space, I'm putting less detail into the shutters. I'm making them a bit more like blobby, if that makes sense, less definition. And they're also softer, a little bit less opaque than the ones closest to the viewer. And the ones closest to the viewer also have the highest amount of contrast with like color. They're further apart on the color wheel and like from the buildings underneath the shutters. And they're also just the furthest apart value-wise. Detest drawing cars. I don't think I've ever drawn a car willingly in my entire life. It is just so hard for me to draw cars realistically because the curves are so specific, the proportions are very like finicky and hard to capture. And then also I'm not interested by them. I don't really like drawing machines at all. I like drawing animals and people, things that are alive a lot more. But I will say I had so much fun drawing these cars in this painting because I wasn't, holding myself back by trying to obey lifelike proportions. Like drawing funky shaped cars is so delightful. It was just so fun. This tower that I'm working on in the painting that's so beautifully framed by the street and the surrounding buildings is such a cool aspect of the city of Bologna to me. These towers are medieval towers and they're kind of everywhere in Italy, and this one we were able to actually climb to the top and get an amazing view of the city. A warm underpainting for making a sky pop, and this is exactly what I was going for in this painting. I did a bright yellow underpainting and did the entire thing on top of this, and I really like how, first of all, warm it makes the entire scene look, because that's one of the things that attracted me to this scene in the first place. And then also just letting a little bit of the underpainting show through around the perimeters of the buildings and the tower and a little bit in the sky even just makes the blue seem more powerful and more rich. I love, 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 love warm underpaintings. At a different phase in my art making journey, I would have tried to make these letters totally perfect, exactly like the reference image. And I would have agonized over this typography until I thought every letter was evenly spaced, perfect proportions, all the things. But now in my art, I kind of relish the imperfections. It's one of the things that makes our art interesting and, not run-of-the-mill AI art that is just completely infesting the internet. I would say now in this phase of the painting, I'm just moving on to the final sort of juicy little details, like street signs, the little wires on the walls, everything that is contrasting with these larger shapes of the buildings is what I'm working on now. And I love this phase of painting so much. It's just like a lot of thinking like a designer and altering where things go, not necessarily putting things where they are in the photo, but putting them where you think would look best. This is also the stage of the painting where I start to get really scared that I'm gonna ruin it, and I can get a little bit timid at this stage and sort of back out of a lot of the details that would actually improve my piece. And oftentimes I'll just completely stop working on it at this phase and just scan it in and finish it digitally because I'm so worried I'll ruin it. And I'm really trying to ward off those thoughts with this particular painting because I want it to be traditional, as traditional as I can make it. For a lot of my final line work, like for instance this pipe on this orange building to the left, I'm choosing to not fill in the pipe. I like to have a little bit of daintiness contrasted with just this solid orange building, and so that's why I'm choosing not to fill in a lot of these little details, I guess you could say, like the buildings behind the tower as well. I just chose to leave completely empty and not put any sort of value into them. I just really like how that looks, especially with a mixed media piece like this one. It's amazing to me how much more finished a painting looks once you take the tape off. Just those clean edges on the outsides, I love them so, so, so much.